It's my honor and privilege to share with you my parents' story today. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce my nuclear family who has joined us today. If it were not for my parents' survival, we wouldn't all be here today. So my parents, my son Nathan Yellen and my son Jeremy Yellen. Also, I have many friends and family, including my husband and stepson Alex, and would like to thank them for tuning in. This past January marked the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. As time goes by, the voices and the eyewitnesses of the Holocaust are quickly dwindling, and it's at a very high rate now because of the COVID-19 virus. It's my generation and the next to carry their torch. The Anti-Defamation League, a leading anti-hate organization in the United States, determined that in 2018, there were 1,859 anti-Semitic incidents here. Not one day goes by that I don't hear about another one, either here or abroad. In November of 2018, shortly after the Tree of Life massacre here in Pittsburgh, my sister spoke at a vigil in Brooklyn, New York, and in part of her speech, she mentioned that when she and I were girls, my father would always say, you know, the Holocaust could happen again and you better have your passports ready to go to Israel. My sister would respond, Dad, this is the United States. That would never happen here. I personally don't think that the Holocaust could ever happen again, but with the climate in the world today, we have many reasons to be concerned. I'd like to introduce a few people in the photos. It's my grandparents pictured, Julia and Max Loeb, and Edith on the right with her brother Heinz. My mom, Edith Leuchter, was born in Bruchsal, Germany on December 31st, 1927. Her father owned Max Loeb grocery store, named after him, and he sold canned goods and produce, butcher supplies, and tools. The family lived above the grocery store, which is pictured here. In July of 1938, after Max saw the handwriting on the wall, he emigrated to the United States. The plan was to send for everyone else, but unfortunately that never happened. When he got to New York, he sent this telegram to his wife and children. As you can see, the telegram has the swastika emblem on it. On Kristallnacht, otherwise known as the Night of Broken Glass, November 9th and 10th, 1938, Edith was awakened in the wee hours of the morning. She could hear sirens and breaking glass, and even see flames outside of her window, at which point she crawled into bed with her mother, Julia, to seek comfort. Julia said it was no longer safe to stay, so they moved to Matilda Weil's house, Edith's grandmother, about 10 minutes away. Soon after, Heinz, Edith's brother, was sent to a school in Frankfurt. Edith's aunt said there wasn't enough food in Bruchsal, as there were already shortages, and he was sent to a school in Frankfurt. Edith is bitter about this to this day, because she feels that if Heinz wasn't sent away, things could have turned out very differently. From that school, he was moved to an orphanage in Frankfurt and eventually deported to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. This is a letter that Heinz wrote from Theresienstadt to an aunt and uncle who were still living in Germany. You can also see the stamp with Hitler on it. This was the model camp that Hitler invited the Red Cross to show how well he was treating all the prisoners, which obviously wasn't true. In May 1944, he was deported to Auschwitz, the infamous concentration camp in Poland. He was put in a specific area called the Theresian family camp. In 17,517 people were deported from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz. As the Allies were beginning to learn about the Holocaust, this camp was created within Auschwitz to mislead the world about the final solution. Heinz was on a transport of 2,499 people. Upon arrival, he was given a prisoner number between A1445 and A2506. Of the 17,517 people who were deported from Theresienstadt, only 261 survived. Heinz was not one of them. He either died of starvation or disease or was killed in the gas chambers. On October 22nd, 1940, about 29,000 Jews were deported from Bruchsal and surrounding areas in Germany. Edith, her mother Julia, and her grandmother Matilda were given 1 hour to get their things ready to walk to the railroad station in the town. They could only bring a few suitcases. Before I continue, I'd like to show you this footage that was discovered only a few years ago in the Bruchsal, Germany archives. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds long. This past February, we discovered that my mother and her grandmother are in the footage. It's possible that Edith's grandmother is as well, but Edith could only confirm that it's herself and her mother. And I want to point out before I start the video that this is my mom. She was almost 13. This is her mother. And this is the woman who could possibly be our great-grandmother, my great-grandmother. This was obviously very difficult for my family to see a few months ago. When they got to the railroad station, Julia asked for permission to call her son Heinz, who was in Frankfurt, to see if he could join them, but she was denied this request. But she was given approval to go home to look for papers that she said she had to emigrate to the United States. She went back twice, but for whatever reason, the papers were not there. From inside the railroad station, they could see outside the windows. Townspeople, including children, were yelling that they were happy to see the Jews leave Bruchsal, and they were spitting at them. Eventually, they boarded the train, and they breathed a small sigh of relief, because as they crossed the Rhine River, they realized they were traveling south as opposed to east toward Poland. A few days later, they arrived in southwestern France, where they were put in an internment camp called Gers. Edith had to use straw to make mattresses, and there were too few blankets for too many people. Edith described that it was extremely disgusting and very muddy. She went to school, but she learned very little there. In April of 1941, her and her mother and her grandmother were deported to another camp called Bruchsal in the area of Perpignan, still in the south of France. By this point, Julia had a hernia and was ill. At this camp, the barracks were infested with insects, and according to my mom, the beds looked like cages for rabbits. One bright spot was that Max, Edith's father, was able to send packages from the United States. But Edith was always hungry. She says the food consisted of watery soup with vegetables that looked like weeds. Julia was able to save the bread that they were rationed in the morning until the evening to give to Edith when she came back from school. You see, Julia had rosy cheeks, so the other prisoners were actually jealous because they thought they were getting more food than them. The Vichy government of France gave the difficult choice to the parents in the camp to sign their children over to an organization called OSE, which translates to Children's Aid Society. This was a Jewish underground organization that operated throughout the war and saved over 5,000 Jewish children. Edith had to say goodbye to her mother and her grandmother Matilda, but she couldn't hug Matilda at this point because Matilda had body lice. A few months later, Edith got a telegram from her mother that she was deported to Drancy, another internment camp in Paris, and eventually deported to Auschwitz. She hopes that her mother didn't make it there and died of the hernia in the cattle car on the long trip there. She also found out that her grandmother Matilda died in the hospital in Perpignan and luckily wasn't deported. By the end of the war, Edith was in 5 schools and orphanages. While she was in one school, she was also a part-time nanny for a family from the area of Alsace-Lorraine, which is the geographic area between France and Germany. Edith's false papers indicated that she was also from that area, which made sense because she was from Germany and was already learning French. Here she was given the false name Edith Labbe. My mother was also in this particular orphanage called Majelier for about 1.5 years. She made a lot of friends there. Here, she met a boy named Kurt, and he really liked her, but she thought he was a big shot and didn't pay much attention to him. Toward the end of the war, she became a French Girl Scout, and upon liberation, was able to get an affidavit from her father, Max, and immigrated to the United States. She reached the port of New York on April 23rd, 1946. This is an ad Max placed in a German Jewish newspaper called the Aufbau, searching for his wife and son, my uncle and my grandmother, who, as I mentioned earlier, were killed in Auschwitz. My father, Kurt Leuchter, was born in Vienna, Austria on February 6th, 1929. His father, Moritz, pictured here, owned a wholesale silk business called Leuchter and Granig. My father was an only child. He had many friends, and he and his parents went on vacations and had a pretty good life. On March 12th, 1938, all that changed, as that's when Germany annexed Austria, otherwise known as the Anschluss. At this point, the borders were all closed. On Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, Kurt was sent home early from school at about 9:30 in the morning. On his way home from school, he saw a synagogue burning, and the SS were shooting and dragging the men out of the synagogue, forcing them to throw the Torahs, the Jewish Bibles, into the Danube River. He hurried home. When he got to his apartment building, he saw that the SS were arresting his father and 9 other Jewish men. He begged them to tell him where they were taking his father, but they just yelled at him to go upstairs. Kurt sat on the steps and cried while waiting for his mother, Rosa, to return from her shopping trip. Rosa knew it was too dangerous to stay, so they walked 3 blocks to Kurt's grandmother's house. On their way, 2 SS approached them. One grabbed Kurt by the hair, and the other grabbed Rosa by the hair and threw them down onto the street. A woman passerby tried to help them, but the SS threatened her with sending her to Dachau concentration camp. When they got to Kurt's grandmother's house, Kurt's cousin Heinz and his aunt Paula were there as well. 10 days later, there was a knock at the door. They were afraid to open it because they thought it was the SS. But Aunt Paula looked through the peephole and saw somebody looking very dirty and disheveled and thought it was probably safe to open the door. Upon entering it, to their surprise, it was Moritz, my grandfather. He was held in an armory, and the SS treated him very badly and threatened to cut off his finger if he couldn't take off his wedding ring, which fortunately he was able to do. Moritz was told by the Nazis that they had 3 months to get their families out of Austria. He was able to procure a visa via Genoa, Italy, and in February 1939, by way of Cologne, Germany, and Brussels, they ended up in Antwerp, Belgium. They had with them a few suitcases and a bit of jewelry that they had hidden in the clothing. Here, Kurt learned how to speak Flemish and French, and things were quiet for a while. They ended up living very near a man who happened to be from the town of Brody, Poland, which happens to be Moritz's hometown. He moved to Vienna when he was a little boy. One night, when Kurt was eavesdropping on his parents' conversation, he heard that the neighbor would let them hide a bit of jewelry in a washcloth in his basement wall. On May 10th, 1940, everything was upended again, and at 6 a.m. in the morning, the Germans invaded Belgium. All the Jewish men were arrested. Moritz was deported by the Belgians to the south of France. In July of 1940, Rosa and Kurt were moved to a detention camp in Limburg, Belgium. Aunt Paula and the cousin were still in Antwerp. Paula actually didn't look Jewish, as she had blonde hair and blue eyes, so she approached the Gestapo to get papers for them to move to Paris, France, and actually was given permission to do so. They lived there for 2 months, but they wanted to be near Moritz. So they hired a guide to take them across the demarcation line. It was very dangerous. They crossed at night with 14 other Jews. The SS were guarding the border with guard dogs and machine guns. Luckily, they crossed without incident, and at this point boarded a train for Marseille in the south of France. Aunt Paula and the cousin got off in Toulouse, France. Kurt and Rosa were supposed to go to Marseille, but accidentally got off the train one stop before, which was very dangerous because they had no ID papers. Somehow, at 11 years old, Kurt had the wherewithal to push his mother through the train station. They registered with the Jewish agency and were put in a detention camp called Hotel Terminus. By this time, Moritz was in 3 different camps: Saint-Cyprien, Gers, which I had mentioned earlier in my mother's story, but they were in different sections and never crossed paths, and now Camp des Milles. My father was able to bring food to his father on the weekends. The camp was about 30 miles from where he and his mother were. At one point, Rosa and Kurt were moved to the same camp. All 3 were able to get a pass at one point to go to the city of Marseille, and my father had his bar mitzvah there at a synagogue. Soon after that, in August 1942, Kurt's parents were given that same difficult choice, to turn their son over to OSE. And on August 9th, 1942, they signed the papers. This is the last letter that Rosa and Moritz, my grandparents, wrote to my father, Kurt. Basically, it says, my grandparents were looking for my father to procure food for them, and that he should take care of everything and please make them proud. Months later, Kurt found out that Rosa and Moritz were both killed in the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Kurt was now in a place called Hotel Bompard, which was repurposed as a detention camp. The conditions weren't good there either, obviously. So he and some friends decided to escape one night when the French police were drunk. They got caught and they were brought back to Bompard. The second time they escaped, they were more careful and went undetected. Somehow, they knew that there was a home sponsored by OSE called Majelier. There, my father was able to procure food from nearby farmers and used a bicycle with a wagon to bring the food back. Here is where he met a young girl named Edith, who he liked, but as I mentioned before, she was not a fan. Kurt and his friends were told they could go to the port of Marseille and board a ship for the United States. But at that point, the US had reached Africa and the German U-boats were bombing the armed forces. So he was sent back to the orphanage for a brief period of time. In February 1943, Kurt was moved to a boys' delinquent home in a town called Gilles-les-Bois. The director of the home, Mademoiselle Burel, knew he was Jewish, and she had a connection to the mayor of that town, and they provided false papers to Kurt. His new name was now Claude Lambert. He too was supposed to be from Alsace-Lorraine because he was from Austria, so he spoke German, and he also was learning French. Here he cooked and chopped wood and performed various other chores. Months later, somebody squealed that there was a Jewish boy hiding in the home, so the Nazis came looking for him. He was hiding in an armoire for several hours, and luckily the Nazis didn't open the closet. Mademoiselle Burel knew Kurt could no longer stay there, and she made a connection for him to the Maquis, the French underground. And for the next year, Kurt lived in the woods and helped to blow up the last truck of German convoys and the rails that they passed. They received French, British, and American assistance. Upon liberation, he was sent to 2 more orphanages in Lyon, France, and in Paris. At one point, he went back to the neighbor in Antwerp, Belgium. Sure enough, the jewelry was still in the washcloth in the basement wall. He brought his father's gold pocket watch and his mother's bracelet and wedding ring to America. In Paris, he got a job making leather handbags and in the evening attended technical school. His uncle was already living in the United States and was able to get a visa for him. In August of 1946, he boarded the French troop ship called the Athos and with 67 other orphans arrived in the port of New York on September 8, 1946. Excuse me. In January 1947, my father was standing outside the Museum of Modern Art on the sidewalk talking to his friends when who should tap him on the shoulder but Edith, the girl he liked in Magellan, the orphanage. They embraced, and Edith must have seen something different in Kurt this time because they fell in love and were married on August 13, 1950, which coincidentally is my oldest son's birthday. In January 1952, my father was drafted into the US Army and spent 9 months in Korea on the 38th parallel. Luckily, he made it home safe. He worked for Columbia Broadcasting System, which is now CBS, and did TV repairs for a short while. Eventually, he became an aerospace engineer without a college degree. My father worked on the guidance navigation system of a couple of different Apollo missions, and his name, along with several other 100 engineers, is still on microfiche on the moon. This is my dad's signature that says Kurt Leuchter. I'm gonna try to get, no, I can't get to it, sorry. And I have this plaque in my home, and if you can see the view of my bedroom, I actually have one plaque here and another plaque over there. And my sister and my dad has it as well at their homes. In 2011, my father was awarded the Legion of Honor Medal for World War II veterans by the French government. When I read the letter that accompanied it, something just didn't jive in my head. I knew my father was a Holocaust survivor, a Korean War vet, and that his name was on the moon. But then, for the first time, I realized since he fought in the French resistance, he's a World War II vet as well. In 2017, my family was fortunate enough to travel to my mother's hometown, Bruchsal, Germany, and we had 5 Stolpersteins installed. Stolperstein means stumbling stone. The artist, who is pictured here kneeling, who isn't Jewish, started this project in 1996 in Berlin. He lays these stones, or brass markers, in front of the homes of people who were deported, whether they were killed or not. Currently, there are 75,000 Stolpersteins in 24 countries, and it's considered the largest deconstructed Holocaust memorial in the world. We had 5 installed, pictured here, for Julia and Max, my maternal grandparents, for Heinz and Edith, my mother and uncle, and my maternal great-grandmother, Matilda Weil, pictured next to this prayer book that survived from the 1980s. And we were able to use this prayer book to recite a Jewish morning prayer during the ceremony. The townspeople of Bruchsal were absolutely wonderful in that they welcomed us with open arms and were extremely generous of heart. Several spent part of an evening and the day of the ceremony with my family. There was also an assembly at the local middle school pictured here with presentations by students. We even had the opportunity to visit my great-grandfather's grave, which is pictured here as well, and a nearby town who died long before World War II. I grew up on Long Island, New York, in a loving but complicated home. My parents were extremely overprotective, understandably so. My first experience with anti-Semitism was in 1st grade, when my classmate called me a dirty Jew. In junior high school, a boy said firecrackers in the stairwell as I left school. When I was 16 and home alone, the mailbox affixed to our house was blown up and eggs were thrown at the house on an occasional basis. At my current job many years ago, my former boss, who sat not too far away from me, was on the phone one day and I overheard him saying, "Oh, why don't you just do him down?" And then more recently, in the last few years, my husband Mark and I overheard a couple of people who we know use the term Jewish lightning. I didn't even know what that meant, so I went home and I Googled it. Basically, what it means is when somebody burns down their business for the insurance money. How it became an anti-Semitic trope, I have no idea. In 2019, the brother of my classmate who called me a dirty Jew in first grade made a post on a Facebook group of my high school and was just sharing a lot of memories and also was apologizing for being a bully. I decided to add a comment mentioning what his sister had said to me, and he contacted his sister, and she wrote me this email. My adult self is not shocked to see this, given what was said and taught in my house, but I am no less ashamed, horrified, and saddened, especially when I see how this has stuck with you and hurt you so badly. If it's any comfort, I am not the same person and do not advocate hate against anyone and don't tolerate it in my life. Maybe it's some comfort in knowing that I have not continued to hurt others like I hurt you. Thank you for being open to my message. It's great to hear that it had a positive effect. In some ways, that changed my life, and I get it to add to the story as well. This is my family. Some of you may not have seen it on Zoom, but my son Jeremy is on the left, then my dad, then myself, my mom, my sister Julie, my niece Jennifer, my son Nathan, and my niece Amanda. My parents are 91 and 92, and as Rabbi said earlier, they live in Boynton Beach, Florida. My father is on an advisory board for Jewish Family and Children's Services to help allocate funds to survivors who need it, and he also volunteers for the Jewish War Veterans of America and shares his story at local schools. My mom sings in old age homes. My mother's last name is Loeb, which means strong man or lion. And my father's last name is Leuchter, which means candelabra. I'd like to think that the strength and many branches of my family that now exist give us all light and hope for the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Debbie. That's powerful stuff, and it's an amazing story. I'd like to let folks, maybe if you have questions for Debbie or for her parents are here. You see where it says Kurt? What we'll do is maybe you can put your questions into the chat, and Debbie, take a look at the chat and see questions as they come up. Okay, right now we don't have any in there, so folks, now's your chance to type something in there and Debbie can see it. In the meantime, I have a couple, I'm going to ask one or two questions. I took some notes while you were talking. Could you explain more about what the OSE is? Or OSE?
Sure. In French, it's Organisation pour sauver des enfants, which means Organization to Save the Children or Children's Aid Society. And I had mentioned that it's a Jewish underground organization. It actually started in, I believe, in Russia.
The name in French is Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants. The organization started back in the 30s in Russia, and then moved in the, I think it was in the 40s, maybe early 40s.
During the war.
Moved into France and started organizing in France all the children and so forth. And when the war started, they were very popular. A lot of them gave their lives and ended up in Auschwitz. But they saved 5,000 children. They did a tremendous job. Matter of fact, I'm on the board still of the American counterpart, how you say, the American OSE USA. And we thank them a lot of times for what they did for us. But we slowly disappearing because of our age, and we cannot do it much more. So we have to probably by next year give up the whole thing. But we try to support the organization in France for what they did for us.
Thanks, Dad. I have a couple of I do want to mention one comment. Our cousin Helen
Yes,
is pictured, and she wants to say that she's happy to see you and she has many memories of you years ago. And she's also asking the question how you met in New York. Helen, this was in a happenstance in front of the Museum of Modern Art that I think I mentioned in the story. Yeah, so they just happened to be, it was kismet, and they happened to be at the same place at the same time.
It was a very funny thing. I was with some friends in front of the museum, and we were coming out and talking outside. And all of a sudden, somebody tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around. I couldn't believe my eyes.
it was me.
After 4 years, we didn't know each other, where we were, what. And I said, the first thing I said, give me a phone number. And that was it. That clicked it off. And then we were engaged for about a couple of years and got married in 1950.
Wow.
And a year later, I had to join the American Army. I went overseas. And I was gone about 2 years.
So that actually leads me to my second question. I won't ask any more unless nobody else asks questions. So Edith,
Yes.
why all of a sudden did you like this guy after all those times where you didn't?
And it happened.
Okay. Okay. I'm just curious because,
Okay.
you know, it's just so funny.
He was after me.
Oh, okay.
So I misunderstood Helen's question. She wanted, so Helen is my father's, Helen, you want to wave so people can see
Where's
you?
Helen? Oh, hey, there's Helen. Okay.
Okay,
They-
so
No,
she,
here's
her
Helen.
question was actually, so again, Helen is a cousin, and her mother was my father's first cousin.
Right.
She wanted to know how you reconnected with her mother in New York.
Oh, when I first came here to the United States, who brought me here is my uncle, my cousin's father, and her brought me back to the United States. They found out that I was alive when I wrote them. I had their address. I wrote them that I made it through the war and that my parents got killed, and so they sent me the papers to come to the United States.
Her grandmother was there.
It's from Zach Eisenfeld. This is a childhood friend of Nathan and Jeremy's. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. This is for, actually, I think my mom won't be able to answer this, Zach. He would like to know more about how we found the footage of the deportation day in Bruchsal.
Okay.
So-
And before you do that, I'm going to ask you to, so keep in mind, the back of your mind, we have one other question here.
Okay,
Can they ask them if they can talk more about the attitudes of the German or Belgian people before and during deportation?
why don't we do that first?
Okay, go ahead. So so Kurt, tell us about the Belgians and the German people while deportation was going on.
You ask me?
No.
Yes.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
okay.
okay. Well, I'll tell you, we lived only a short time in Belgium, actually, because we got into Belgium in February 39 and March, no, was it March? May 15, May 10, the Germans entered Belgium. And before that, we had a little anti-Semitism, which we felt was there. But it wasn't anything drastic. But it was there, it was always there, some anti-Semitism. I went to school in Belgium with some friends who also came from Germany and Austria. And we didn't feel anything in school that we had to learn French, Flemish, but they didn't discriminate against us. Until the Germans came in and made all the foreigners report to the city hall and send them to France, southern France.
So Debbie, can you tell us about the footage? And then there's another question in the chat that you might want to address after that.
Okay, well, I'm having trouble with my mouse. Perhaps my husband can come upstairs and help me. Anyway,
I didn't know you got lice there.
yeah, I said that in 2017, we went to Germany to have the Stolpersteins installed. And we met a lot of wonderful people, one of whom is named Rolf Schmidt. Basically, he was the person who put everything together for that day, along with a lot of other assistants. And this was in the Bruchsal archives that he didn't tell me how he actually found it, but he found it and then he sent it to us. I had seen the footage around the time we went to Germany, but I didn't recognize my mother. And then they sent me an email a couple of months ago asking me if I could identify our family.
Well, so a couple other questions here. So Oma and Opa, this is obviously somebody who knows you, Kurt and Edith. What was your experience when you met people from Germany throughout your life in terms of forgiving them, getting along with them, how you felt in interacting with them?
Well, I tell you what, you can't blame the young people for what happened. It's impossible to blame them, they weren't around. But the older people, that's a different story altogether. Some of them are good and some are not. You have the same thing here. You have bad and you have good people. So half these people that organized this for Edith in Bruchsal, Germany, it happened to be very nice people.
They were not anti-Semites.
They were not with the Nazis, but they had to join. I mean, make believe or whatever they had to
follow,
because the Nazis didn't care. If you opened your mouth and said something against, you were arrested. You were sent to Dachau, a concentration camp, and they didn't care if you were Jewish or not.
Right.
So it's tough. I went back to Vienna, Austria, and I tell you, I couldn't look in the faces into the old people. I just couldn't, because you could see that the Nazis were in them.
the hate.
The hate, you could see it. The young people is a different story. You can talk to anybody, young people. It's not their fault. That's the way they feel. I mean.
So Kurt and Edith, Debbie showed us some letters that were written during that time. And the question, I guess, that somebody wants to know is how did people know where to send the letters? Because they didn't know where anybody went.
Oh, I sent a letter to my father after I was in Mossack in the south of France, in the Ose home. I remembered my father's address in Middle Village, Queens. And I wrote him a letter, and somebody at the post office saw the letter, and she knew that she knew my father, and she gave him the letter. And then my father started writing to me, and that's how it happened.
Wow. And we have another question from Marilyn Newman, who I know is very, very big on genealogy. She wants to know if you have done a family tree, Debbie and Kurt and Edith.
My father can answer that.
Okay, Kurt?
At the family
Yes, the family, I started the family tree on sheets of paper. And then when my granddaughter came with her husband, he got involved doing it on a computer. And he did a terrific job. He did a terrific job. He put everything on the computer, my family, her family, whatever we knew, as far as we know. We could only go so far, but that's it. His parents are here.
It's Julie's son-in-law.
Yeah, his parents are here, they're waving, yeah.
Yeah, Rosalind and, right.
Right.
So I do have, there are two more questions. One was from Rich Goldberg, who wants to know, Edith, your dad left and he was somehow supposed to get everybody back together with him at some point. And so what happened there, and how did that happen? And one other person here has asked if you've ever recognized anybody here in this country that you knew who had been a Nazi back in the old days. Have you ever seen anybody here?
No.
That's an easy answer. So, but the first question, how, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your dad and what he was trying to do for you and your family, Edith.
Even when my father came to the United States, he came in 1938 because he said that it's worse for the women and children than for the fathers or the
The men,
grandfathers.
the work for the men.
So he went, and then he thought that we would be able to come and get an affidavit, but then it was too late and we were already in camp.
Okay. All right, I think that answers all the questions we have so far. Are there any more questions for these folks? You guys are an amazing resource. You know, when I think of you know, how everybody is, how we're losing people and how important it is that we get to hear your story and how you guys were able to communicate it so beautifully.
Each story is different.
That's right. Every story, like
Everybody has a story.
Because we all had to live alone and save our own neck.
You know what you need to do is you need to get Zach Eisenfeld to come and do a documentary film about your life.
Funny you should say that, because he has approached me about that.
I'm talking about it with Nathan as the story was going on.
I tell you what, there's not a lot of these stories. You know, Steven Spielberg does these. He has this show up project in which he's gone out and filmed a lot of survivors.
They were interviewed by him. I mean, by his
Yes.
organization.
We were interviewed, but not himself. Also, and somebody came to interview us,
Well,
but he did not tell
he
our
didn't,
whole,
he wasn't
he
a
didn't
good
ask
interview.
our whole story.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions that have just popped up here. So
Oh.
do you see those, Debbie?
I see the last one. Do you still have the jewelry that was hidden in the wall, Dad and Mom?
Yes,
Wow.
it was amazing. My parents, I overheard my parents talk as a boy. And just it stuck in my ears somehow. And after the war, I remembered. After I came out, and I remembered, I said, gee, I got to take a trip to Belgium. Lucky, that was my father's best friend that he met in Belgium.
Jewish,
And they came from the same town. They were born in the same place.
Jewish.
Jewish.
Wow.
And he had a milk and butter business in Antwerp. And they befriended, when we went to Belgium, they befriended very well. They were good friends. And what happened, that I found out that my mother and my father were talking, how about leaving it in his basement somehow,
In the wall.
in the wall. And it stuck in my ear. I listened to everything.
Wow.
But what happened is after the war, I took a train. I went back. The mother and the daughter got killed in Auschwitz. He survived.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know how he survived. I never asked the question because I was only a short time there. And he says, I got something for you. So I
Gave
know.
all the jewelry.
So I took everything and that's it.
Thanks, Dad. Here is a question for Mom from Michelle and Morgan, our cousins. Do you know why Heinz was sent away and not you?
Yes, I know why. Because Aunt Liesel said there was not enough food.
That's not what I said. I asked you, she wants to know why he was sent away, but not you were.
Because they didn't like him.
Okay.
My Aunt Liesel didn't like him. She said he was from the other side of the family and not from the Wild family, from the Loeb family.
Okay. And one of the members of our synagogue, Donnie Roth, would like to know, Dad, what was your best experience speaking to students who you've spoken with about your story?
What was that?
He didn't hear
I'm
that.
sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'll ask again. What was the best experience that you've had with students telling your story? Can you tell us a little bit about one of the really good experiences you had with?
No, well, I got a lot of letters back from the kids. They were very excited to write to me, and I hope it sunk in. I hope they observed what I told them. But I'm still going. Almost every year they call me at the Jewish family service. It's the school. It's a middle school, and I talked to the kids
Jewish
there.
middle school.
Jewish.
And you speak
school.
there. And they ask questions.
And they ask all kinds of questions. The kids ask you. They're about 12, 13, 14 years old.
You know, it's interesting. Every time I speak to my parents or every time we do this, there's a little piece of information I may not have heard yet. For example, the gentleman who hid the jewelry, either I don't remember or I never heard that the mother and daughter were killed in Auschwitz.
Oh, no, you didn't.
It's an ongoing process. I mean, I spoke in January at the Mount Lebanon Public Library in Pittsburgh, and we didn't even have this footage yet, which now is part of the story.
Debbie, I see that Jeremy has a question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jeremy, where's Jeremy?
where is
He
it?
has a
Go
question.
ahead.
Jeremy,
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Mommy, the question from Jeremy is, can you tell us one positive thing that you took away from your, from being in the Holocaust? That question's for Mom.
I made a lot of friends, and they were all in the same place, in the same boat, and they were all very, very nice, and we kept in touch after the war with some of
Yes.
them.
The both of us.
And some of them were from the same area than where I am from in Germany. I had a best friend, Trudy Kuhn. And we were friends all these years. She just passed away about a year ago.
I have two friends
Wait,
still. One went to school with me in Vienna. He lives in Virginia.
And they speak on Skype.
We went through both things. He's on Skype? Oh, yeah?
No,
We
I
went
said
together.
no.
Anthony's on Skype?
No, forget it.
I
Okay.
thought you said Alan
We
is on
we
Skype.
went together to school, and then we went to Belgium together to school. And my friend, the other friend, was from Germany. And he went to school in Belgium. We all went to the same school. But he only got two.
Theo
Yeah.
Brennick.
Theo and Freddie and Eva was with me. And
And I have another question from cousin Helen. Have any of you spoken or considered speaking to non-Jewish groups? They are probably less likely to have heard a first-person story.
I have spoken to non-Jewish fellows in school.
Okay.
You should know that we have non-Jewish clergy on this call right now.
Yeah. So they very friendly. People absorbed it. They never heard from the whole story from people, some of them. And that's what happened. But I gladly speak to anybody about
If they're interested.
if they're interested, I wouldn't mind speaking. By the way, my story, if anybody goes to Marseille, to the Camp de Mille, and that's about 18 kilometers from Marseille, it became a museum. A museum from the Holocaust, from all the people that were deported from there. And my story and two of my friends' stories are all running 24 hours a day on the video.
Theo, your friend
Yeah,
Theo,
Theo,
from
yeah,
Virginia.
Yeah, and one
His
more
story,
fellow
and
who
his-
passed away.
My sister is asking who are the clergy on the call with us?
Well, I did see a comment from one of them, and that was Scott Hill. I don't know who everybody is, but Scott, who is a minister in Aspinwall, which is a local suburb here, is on the call. He made a comment actually in the chat, and I know there were at least a couple who were planning on being here. So not all these phones tell me exactly who is.
Right.
But I know, but Scott I know was there because he actually made a comment in the chat. And I'm sure that there are others who may have been in and out. I did not monitor every single person coming in and out.
We didn't understand what you were saying.
What I was saying is there were some non-Jewish clergy who was listening to this call.
Oh, okay,
I
that's
know.
very good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yes.
Yeah, Scott is a very bright guy. He actually speaks and writes Hebrew as well as a lot of Jews I know.
I spoke to a veteran organization. I belong to two veteran organizations, Korean veteran and the Jewish war veteran for 57 years. And I spoke many, many times about my story. So they all know.
What are the most important ways to ensure we keep creating a world of tolerance, love, and equality?
Yeah, unfortunately,
the hard
I
thing.
don't think it will happen. There will always be anti-Semitism
That's
in,
right.
in this country and other places.
That's
Germany
all the
and
same.
Italy,
God
all
created
the
us
different
equal.
countries.
We should have the same rights, the same love for
That's
everybody.
not what I was saying.
Why do you think it will always be that way forever?
Because people, the non-Jews hate the Jews for years and years, and not only that time, from years and thousands of years
Look,
ago.
I want to tell you something, Jeremy. There were Jewish people that hated Jewish people, okay? In the camps. So it's no different. I'm just letting you know. So it just have to be.
That's a tough open-ended question there, Jeremy, I think, for Kurt and Edith to answer. But I think that we want to take a look we have at least one more question here. So how did, Kurt and Edith, how did you guys get news? How did you find out who was where and what was going on, either during or after the Holocaust?
Well, I've listened. I was in the underground, in the French resistance. We had to have a radio, the BBC. It came over Spanish, Andorra, came over Andorra. We found out almost everything that's going on. We had to have a blanket over it because the Germans were circulating around trying to get the signal. So we found out quite a bit. They used to go every night, Aquí Radio Andorra, Aquí Radio Andorra. And then all of a sudden, it came in English. And in German too. They translated some of it. So we found out a lot of things. The codes came in, some codes and everything else. That's how I found out what goes on.
Wow, okay. Are there any more questions for these lovely people? Very special people, Kurt and Edith. And Debbie too, by the way.
Thank you so much. Thank
Rabbi,
you,
thank
everybody,
you.
for joining us today.
Well, we want to thank you guys for being here. We want to thank you for sharing your story. And we pray that you're going to be around for a long time to keep doing it. And I want to say that I want to thank Debbie and the rest of her family who's here, who helped populate this meeting. And it's especially moving for me to see some of my former students. I saw Jeremy and Nathan and Zach, and I don't know who else is here. But it was really great to see you guys. And Debbie, you do such a great job in telling your parents' story.
Yes,
We're
yes,
also grateful for your efforts, and I know that your sister Julie is very proud of you as well.
yes.
So if there are no further questions, I think now would be a good time to say thank you, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.